Have you ever wondered what shaped the man who would become the first president of the United States? It wasn't just battlefields and politics. The story of George Washington begins long before he was a general, in the rolling hills of colonial Virginia. Let's journey back to February 22nd, 1732 in Westmoreland County. This is where George Washington was born, to Augustine and Mary Ball Washington, a family of planters whose lives were deeply intertwined with the land. Imagine a world powered by horseback and candlelight, where the vast American wilderness was both a promise and a peril. The Washingtons were part of the Virginia gentry, owning a tobacco plantation that relied on the labor of enslaved people. This was the world that greeted baby George, a world of stark contrasts, of genteel society and brutal realities, of sprawling nature and rigid social structures. His home, known as Pope's Creek, was a bustling hub of agricultural life, and it was here, amidst the scent of tobacco and the rhythms of the seasons, that the foundations of his character were first laid. When George was about 3 years old, his family moved up the Potomac River to another property, a little hunting creek, which would later be famously renamed Mount Vernon, but their time there was brief. They soon settled at Ferry Farm, just across the Rappahannock River from the growing town of Fredericksburg. This is the place most associated with his childhood, and it's here that one of the most famous, though likely untrue, stories about him was born. We've all heard it, a young George, a brand new hatchet in his father's prized cherry tree. "I cannot tell a lie," he supposedly confessed. "I did cut it with my little hatchet." This tale was actually invented by an early biographer named Parson Weems, decades after Washington's death. Why did it stick? Because it captured something people wanted to believe about their hero, that his integrity was there from the very beginning. While the story might be fiction, it speaks to the values of honesty and responsibility that were heavily emphasized in the upbringing of a young gentleman in colonial Virginia. Life at Ferry Farm was a mix of farm chores, outdoor adventures, and the beginnings of an education. But this idyllic chapter of his youth came to a sudden and tragic end. In 1743, when George was just 11 years old, his father, Augustine, died unexpectedly. This event changed everything. The death of the family patriarch threw the Washingtons into a state of uncertainty. Under the terms of the will, George's older half-brothers, Lawrence and Augustine Jr., inherited the most valuable properties. George, along with his younger siblings, was left with Ferry Farm and several plots of undeveloped land, all to be managed by his mother, Mary, until he came of age. His father's death meant that the traditional path for a wealthy Virginian, soon on education in England, was now closed to him. Unlike his half-brothers, George would never receive a formal classical education. His schooling was practical and sporadic, likely provided by tutors and local schoolmasters. He learned the basics: reading, writing, and arithmetic. But what he lacked in formal instruction, he made up for with an insatiable curiosity and a drive for self-improvement. He filled notebooks with rules of civility and decent behavior, meticulously copying out over 100 guidelines for how to conduct himself in society. This wasn't just a schoolboy exercise. It was a conscious effort to mold his own character, to become a man of discipline and respect. He was also a voracious reader, especially on subjects that fascinated him, like military history, and most importantly, agriculture. From a young age, he saw the land not just as a source of wealth, but as a science to be mastered. He experimented with crops, studied soil, and dreamed of new, more efficient farming methods. This passion for the land would remain with him throughout his entire life. In the wake of his father's death, George grew incredibly close to his older half-brother, Lawrence. Lawrence was 14 years his senior, sophisticated and worldly man who had been educated in England and had served as an officer in the British military. He took George under his wing, becoming a mentor and a father figure. Lawrence lived at the beautiful little Hunting Creek estate, which he had inherited and renamed Mount Vernon in honor of his former commander, Admiral Edward Vernon. For young George, visiting Mount Vernon was like stepping into another world. It was a place of elegance and influence. Lawrence was married into the powerful Fairfax family, one of the wealthiest and most connected families in all of Virginia. Through Lawrence, George was introduced to a sophisticated circle of people, including the formidable Lord Fairfax himself. He learned to navigate the complex social landscape of the colonial elite, mastering the arts of conversation, dancing, and proper etiquette. This exposure was an education in itself, teaching him how to command respect and carry himself with an air of authority. Lawrence also saw potential in his younger brother's knack for mathematics and his love for the outdoors. He encouraged George to pursue a career that was both respectable and practical surveying. In the expanding world of colonial America, surveyors were in high demand. They were the ones who charted the unknown, drew the maps, and defined the boundaries of property and power. At just 16 years old, George joined a surveying party organized by Lord Fairfax to map his vast land holdings in the Shenandoah Valley. This was his first real adventure, a journey into the rugged backcountry. For weeks he trekked through dense forests, crossed swollen rivers, and slept under the stars. He encountered Native American tribes and weathered rough conditions, learning invaluable lessons in resilience and leadership. He proved to be a skilled and reliable surveyor, and his work earned him both money and a reputation for being dependable and tough. By 17, he was appointed the official surveyor for Culpeper County, a remarkable achievement for someone so young. This job provided him with a steady income and, more importantly, an intimate knowledge of the Virginian landscape knowledge that would prove indispensable in the years to come. But George's ambitions extended beyond drawing lines on a map. His brother Lawrence's military career had left a deep impression on him. He yearned for the same sense of honor and distinction. When Lawrence's health began to fail from tuberculosis, he stepped down from his position as an adjutant general of the Virginia militia. George saw an opportunity, lobbied Virginia's governor, and in 1752, at the age of just 20, he was appointed to a district adjutancy with the rank of major. He had no military experience, but he had ambition, connections, and a willingness to learn. His first major test came quickly. Tensions were rising between the British and the French over control of the Ohio Valley, a vast and resource-rich territory. In late 1753, Governor Dinwiddie of Virginia sent the young Major Washington on a perilous diplomatic mission. His task was to journey hundreds of miles into the wilderness to deliver a message to the French, demanding they abandon their forts in the region. The journey was brutal. Washington faced freezing weather, hostile territory, and a near-drowning incident in the icy Allegheny River. He successfully delivered the message, but the French commander politely refused to leave. Washington's detailed journal of the expedition was published upon his return, and it made him a minor celebrity throughout the colonies and even in London. He was praised for his courage and determination. Just a few months later, in 1754, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel and sent back to the Ohio Valley, this time with a small force of Virginian soldiers. Their mission was to defend a British fort being built at the forks of the Ohio River, modern-day Pittsburgh, but they were too late. The French had already captured the site and built their own stronghold, Fort Duquesne. What happened next sparked a world war. Washington ambushed a small French scouting party in what became known as the Battle of Jumonville Glen. The French commander was killed, an act the French considered an assassination. In retaliation, a much larger French force surrounded Washington's men at a hastily constructed stockade they called Fort Necessity. Outnumbered and outgunned, Washington was forced to surrender, the only time in his entire career he would do so. Though it was a military defeat, the incident ignited the French and Indian War, which spread into the global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. For George Washington, it was a harsh but invaluable lesson in command, strategy, and the brutal realities of warfare. He had made mistakes, but he had also shown bravery and leadership under fire. The young surveyor from the Virginia countryside had taken his first decisive steps on the path that would lead him to become the commander of the Continental Army and the father of a new nation. His formative years were over, and his destiny was just beginning to unfold. Thanks for watching our journey into the early life of George Washington. If you found this story as fascinating as we do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let us know in the comments what part of Washington's youth surprised you the most. See you in the next video.